I met someone who only lasted one day, and the cruelest part is that I didn't believe her until her watch stopped, and the rest of the world stopped with it, just long enough that I've never been able to talk myself out of what I saw. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't one of those life is short lines people throw around when they don't want to go deeper. It was literal in a way that hurt. An old watch, the kind you picture on your grandfather's wrist. The glass cracked in one corner, the leather strap worn soft like it had learned how to survive. She held that watch the way you hold a wounded bird, firm, careful, afraid of squeezing too hard. And when she said calmly, almost kindly, "I'm only here today," I laughed. I laughed because her voice had that practiced lightness of someone who learned how to wrap tragedy in thin paper so it wouldn't scare anyone off. I'd just crossed 40, with the kind of mindset that comes from seeing enough life to stop romanticizing coincidence. Still, that morning was gray in a specific way, the sky hanging low, the whole city speaking softer than usual. I was sitting in a diner off the highway, drinking black coffee, pretending the day was just another box to check. The place smelled like bacon, pancakes, and cheap nostalgia. The bell over the door rang when she walked in, and it wasn't her entrance that got me. It was the way she scanned the room, like she wasn't looking for a table, but for an exit. She took the seat next to me like it already belonged to her. Ordered black coffee, no sugar. When the waitress asked if she wanted the table by the window, she said no thanks and chose the corner where the glass couldn't throw her reflection back at her. I noticed. Not because I'm clever, because people who are in a hurry leave clues in small things. When she said my name, I swear the back of my neck prickled. I don't remember telling anyone my name. Maybe the waitress said it. Maybe I said it on the phone without realizing. That's how the brain tries to save you later. I asked how she knew me, and she said from the same place I was from, just a little more tired. She smiled like that tiredness was a memory, not an open wound. "Just today," she said again, stirring her coffee without adding anything to it. "I only get today." I asked if it was some kind of challenge, one of those modern things people invent to feel profound. She shook her head slowly and touched the watch with her thumb, like she was checking to make sure it was still there. "When this stops, I stop," she said. "No drama, no sad music." Then she added the sentence that hooked me like a clean hit to the chest. "If I stay longer, I ruin it." That should have been my cue to stand up and walk away. I didn't, because that sentence wasn't flirting. It was a warning. She talked fast at first, then slowed down, like she was managing time instead of conversation. She avoided last names. When I asked for hers, she gave me a first name that was too ordinary to be true and said, "For today, that's enough." She didn't like photos. When I lifted my phone without thinking, she rested her hand over mine, gentle, firm, and said she didn't leave traces. Not today. And for some reason, I listened like we'd known each other for years. We left the diner and walked without a plan, just an unspoken agreement not to waste what she was giving me. The sky threatened rain, the wind carrying that metallic smell of late winter. Every 20 or 30 minutes, something shifted. A silence stretched longer than it should. A look lingered. A question she answered with another question. It felt like being guided through a story that didn't have the patience for long introductions. Early in the afternoon, she took me to a small park by a narrow creek. We sat on a damp bench. She pulled a thin envelope from her bag, creased at the corners. No name, no return address. She set it between us like she was placing a heart on the table, but she didn't let me touch it. "Later," she said. I asked later than what. She glanced at the watch, and her eyes did something strange, like they were afraid of a word. "After the end." She said end, like it was a time, not an idea. I tried to lighten things, asked if she was running from someone, if she'd messed something up, if she was married, had a jealous boyfriend. She laughed, but it was short, like her body didn't have the energy for long lies. "No one's chasing me," she said. "I just have an agreement." That word, agreement, made me think of paperwork, money, the things people sign to survive. And she fed that idea, maybe without realizing it, maybe on purpose to spare me. She talked about a restart program, the kind you hear about in both small towns and big cities. Clear rules, check-in calls, someone on the other end of the line making sure you don't drift. She called it the second chance line, like it was a real thing. and mentioned a coordinator named Marla with the confidence of someone who'd said that name 1,000 times. She said that for 24 hours she had to be invisible to her old life. One clean day, one day with no traces, one day where no one could reach her, and she couldn't reach anyone either. It sounded believable enough that I wanted it to be true, because when you find something good too late, you grab onto any explanation that lets it keep breathing. In the middle of her talking, her phone started to vibrate. Not a normal buzz. It was insistent, urgent. Her face drained of color instantly, like someone flipped a switch inside her. "Don't answer," she said, and her voice cracked for the first time. "It's just the check-in." She took a slow breath and looked at her watch like she was apologizing to her own wrist. I saw the name on the screen before she could turn it away. Marla, check-in. And then the first thing happened that I can't explain without sounding crazy. The exact second the phone stopped vibrating, the church bell across the street struck the hour, and the sound cut off halfway through, like someone unplugged the world. Traffic noise went dull, distant, like I'd suddenly gone underwater. A kid ran past with a dog, and for a split second it was like his feet didn't touch the ground, not because he floated, but because my perception stumbled. I blinked hard, and it wasn't enough. The air felt tight, and she didn't panic. She just closed her eyes and gripped the watch like she was holding a door shut. It lasted a second, maybe less. The bell finished ringing like nothing had happened. The street noise snapped back. The dog barked. The world kept going. But my stomach didn't catch up. I looked at her, expecting fear, and what I saw instead was resignation. The kind you only see in people who've been through this before and are tired of pretending otherwise. "You felt it," I said, not a question. She opened her eyes and gave me a look that wasn't a plea and wasn't a confession. It was something in between, permission maybe for me to stop playing along. "That's why it's only today," she said. "I can't stretch it." After that, I stopped trying to be the rational guy. I just tried to be present, which for me was harder. We drove with no destination down a secondary road, that strip of asphalt that cuts past fields and old motel signs. The radio picked up a station playing old songs, and she tapped the dashboard in the same rhythm every time, like her body was calibrated to a different clock than mine. At a gas station, she avoided the bathroom mirror. In a convenience store, she stayed clear of the cameras without even thinking about it. I thought about asking why, but every time I opened my mouth, I felt like the question would steal minutes from what was left. Near sunset, we pulled into an empty parking lot behind a grocery store. The sky had gone the color of lead, and the streetlights came on one by one, like someone was counting. She looked at me and said, with the kind of calm that only comes after acceptance, "Promise me something." I asked what. She said, "Don't try to buy time, don't bargain, don't chase what doesn't chase back." I wanted to say I wouldn't promise. Wanted to say this was insane. Wanted to say people don't come with expiration dates. Instead, I said, okay, because I wasn't sure anymore if I was trying to save her or just protect my own hope. She finally put the envelope in my hand. This time I felt the weight for real. It wasn't just paper. Something thin and rigid was inside, like a key or a small plate. She closed my fingers around it like I was a kid holding something dangerous. "Later," she said again. "I need you to wait for later." When night fell, we walked slower. She talked less. The ticking of the watch had gone uneven now, like a tired heart trying to keep pace. I asked if I'd see her again. She said not the way I was thinking. Then she said something that hit me right where maturity lives. "One well-lived day can teach you more than years spent postponing. This is all I have." When we said goodbye, there was no drama, just a long hug, the kind that feels like you're grabbing time by the collar. She stepped back, took 2 steps away, came back, and adjusted the watch on my wrist for a second, like she was measuring something in me. Then she looked past my shoulder, like she could hear a train coming from far away, and she walked off without turning back. I stood there with the envelope in my hand and the uncomfortable feeling that something important had been placed inside me without instructions. I could have opened it right then. I didn't. Because against everything I thought I knew about myself, I wanted to honor the one rule she gave me. I wanted to do at least one thing her way, not ruin it. I've never said this out loud until now. Maybe because I knew that once I did, it would become too real. Maybe because I didn't want to open that envelope alone and face the kind of truth that changes how a man measures time. If you stay with me for the next part, you'll understand why one day was enough to follow me for years, and why I'm still putting off the moment I finally look at what she left behind. I didn't open the envelope that night. I went home, set it on the kitchen table, and circled it like it might move if I turned my back. The house was quiet in the way it only gets after midnight, when even the refrigerator sounds too loud. I washed my hands twice for no reason, poured a drink I didn't finish. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted to the envelope like it was breathing. I kept hearing her voice saying later, not as a command, as a kindness. I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of clocks without numbers and roads that ended in fog. I woke up before sunrise with the strange certainty that something had already changed, even though nothing visible had. The watch she'd adjusted on my wrist the night before was gone. I checked the nightstand, the bathroom sink, the floor, nothing. For a brief, irrational moment, I wondered if it had ever been there at all. Then I saw the faint impression on my skin, the ghost of the strap, and the question shifted from if to why. By mid-morning, I was back in the car. Not because I had a plan, but because staying still felt like betrayal. I drove the same secondary roads we'd taken, past the diner, past the park, past the gas station where she'd avoided the mirror. Everything looked aggressively normal. People pumping gas, kids waiting for a bus, a woman arguing into her phone. The world had moved on with insulting efficiency. At the diner, the waitress recognized me, asked if I wanted the usual. I said yes, then surprised myself by asking if she remembered the woman from yesterday. Black coffee sat with me at the counter. The waitress paused, thinking, then shook her head. Said she remembered me, but not who I was with. You were alone most of the time, she added, not unkindly. Happens more than people think. That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. I walked to the park next, sat on the same damp bench by the creek. The water moved the way water always does, indifferent and continuous. I half expected to find some trace she'd left behind, a dropped glove, a note tucked into the slats. There was nothing. Just my reflection in the water, older than I remembered, like the day had added weight to my face overnight. I told myself the explanation was simple. The second chance line, Marla, the agreement. 24 hours of invisibility, a clean break. People do harder things every day to survive. I'd seen it. Hell, I'd done it myself in quieter ways. Cut people off, walked away, reinvented. There was nothing supernatural about discipline, about choosing to disappear for a while. And yet, around noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at it until it stopped, my chest tight for no good reason. A minute later, a voicemail notification appeared. I didn't play it right away. I needed to believe I still had some control over the order of things. When I finally did, it wasn't her voice. It was a woman's voice, calm, professional, American in that neutral way that feels trained. She said my name correctly on the first try, said she was calling regarding a check-in, paused, then said she realized she might have the wrong number and apologized for the inconvenience. She didn't say where she was calling from. She didn't say her name. The call ended with a soft click that sounded too deliberate to be an accident. Marla, my mind supplied, even though there was no proof. That should have settled it, should have locked the explanation in place. Instead, it cracked something open. Because if it was a mistake, it was a precise one. And if it wasn't, then she'd given them my number for a reason. Either way, I was no longer just a bystander. That afternoon, I finally picked up the envelope again, turned it over in my hands. It was heavier than I remembered. The corners softened from being carried a long time. Still no name, no instructions. Just the quiet confidence of something that knew it would be opened eventually. I slid a finger under the flap, then stopped. Later echoed again, louder this time. I set it back down, frustrated with myself for listening to someone who was no longer there. I drove again, this time farther, past the grocery store parking lot, past the old motel sign with half the letters burned out. On impulse, I pulled into the motel anyway. It looked like it had looked 20 years ago, and like it would look the same 20 years from now. The clerk barely glanced up. When I asked if a woman had stayed there recently, just for a day, he shrugged, said a lot of people passed through, said some didn't leave much of a trace. When I described her, black coffee, no photos, avoided mirrors, he squinted, then shook his head. Sounds like someone trying not to be remembered, he said. That usually works. By early evening, the red herring had become a rope I was clinging to. The agreement explained her precision, her calm, her distance. It even explained the envelope, a controlled goodbye, a clean exit, a mercy disguised as mystery. I told myself I was lucky. I got one perfect day instead of a slow unraveling. Then I noticed something that ruined that comfort. Every clock I passed that night, on dashboards, storefronts, my microwave at home, was off by a minute. Not the same minute, just wrong. Close enough to ignore. Close enough that I almost did. Almost. Until I checked my phone against an online time server and felt my stomach drop. The phone was right. Everything else wasn't. I stood in my kitchen, the envelope between my hands again, and realized the question I'd been avoiding wasn't where she went. It was when. And for the first time since she walked away without looking back, the explanation I'd been holding on to, the agreement, the program, the clean one-day rule, felt less like an answer and more like something she'd built carefully, so I wouldn't ask what came next. By the third day, the idea that she was simply gone had settled into me the way a bad diagnosis does. You don't fight it at first. You reorganize around it. You learn how to breathe with it sitting on your chest. I went back to work, answered emails, nodded at people who asked how my weekend was. I said fine, because that word is designed to end conversations quickly. The red herring did its job, the agreement, the second chance line, Marla. It all lined up clean enough that I could stack my doubts on top of it and call it a shelf. People disappear all the time. People reinvent themselves. People choose one clean break over 1,000 small goodbyes. If I'd met her at another point in my life, I might have admired her discipline instead of missing her. Still, discipline doesn't explain residue. On Wednesday afternoon, I stopped at a hardware store to replace a dead smoke detector battery. The place smelled like lumber and dust and old air. As I waited at the counter, I noticed a corkboard near the exit. Flyers, handwritten notes, lost cats, guitar lessons. One piece of paper was older than the rest, yellowed, curling at the corners. It showed a photo I recognized before my brain caught up. It was her, not recent, not yesterday. The woman in the photo looked younger, but it was unmistakable. Same eyes, same way her mouth leaned toward a smile without quite committing. The heading read, "Community Search Notice, no date at first glance, just a phone number, half torn away." My pulse went loud in my ears. I stepped closer and saw the date printed small at the bottom, 8 years ago. The air in the store felt thinner. I asked the guy behind the counter about the flyer, trying to keep my voice steady. He barely looked up, said it had been there forever, said nobody bothered to take it down because nobody remembered who put it up in the first place. "Some people don't get found," he added, like it was a neutral fact. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the paper like it might explain itself. 8 years ago didn't fit the agreement story. Programs end, rules expire, but people don't usually disappear for nearly a decade and then reappear just long enough to share a day and vanish again, unless vanishing was the point. I went back to my car and finally did the thing I'd been avoiding. I opened the envelope. Inside was a laminated card and a folded piece of paper. The card was thin, worn smooth around the edges. A hospital ID. Her photo, older than the flyer, but younger than the woman I'd met. Her name printed cleanly underneath. A barcode. An expiration date that had passed years ago. My hands shook as I held it. Hospitals don't laminate souvenirs. The folded paper was heavier than it should have been. 1 page. My name written at the top in careful block letters. Not rushed, not emotional. Just precise. She apologized for the timing before she apologized for anything else. Said she'd learned that timing was its own kind of truth. She wrote that she didn't tell me everything because if she had, I would have spent the day trying to save her instead of seeing her. She said she wanted to be remembered as someone who walked beside me, not someone who collapsed into my arms. She mentioned the agreement again, but differently, not as a program. As a promise she'd made to herself. One day, once in a while, to step fully into the world, to touch it, to leave something warm behind. She didn't explain the rules. She said rules change when you're not built to last the same way other people are. That line stayed with me. I read the letter twice, then a third time slower. She wrote about time like it was a place you could slip out of if you weren't careful. Said she'd always been slightly offbeat, like a watch that never quite matched the room it was in. Doctors had tried to explain it. Lawyers had tried to contain it. None of it fit into a sentence she trusted enough to give me. I wanted the red herring back. I wanted Marla and check-in calls and clean logic. What I had instead was a hospital ID that shouldn't exist anymore and a letter that refused to land anywhere solid. That night, I dreamed of the moment in the park when the world stuttered. In the dream, I noticed something I hadn't in real life. Everyone else kept moving. Only I felt it. Only I looked at her when it happened. When I woke up, my pillow was damp and I didn't remember crying. The next morning, I went back to the hardware store. The flyer was gone. The corkboard was clean. I asked the same guy behind the counter about it. He frowned, said there hadn't been a search notice there in years, asked if I was sure I wasn't mixing it up with somewhere else. I walked out without buying anything. By then, the truth was pressing in from all sides. Not enough to name, enough to corner. The agreement story hadn't been a lie. It had been a shield, something she'd built sturdy enough for me to lean on until I was strong enough to stand without it. She hadn't disappeared because she wanted a new life. She'd disappeared because time wouldn't let her stay in one. And the day she gave me hadn't been a beginning or an ending. It had been a visit. Once I understood that, the question stopped being what happened to her and became what she'd been protecting me from. I went back to the places that still held her shape, not looking for proof anymore, looking for context, the diner, the park, the empty lot behind the grocery store. I paid attention to the details I'd ignored while I was busy wanting the day to last. The way she never checked the time on my phone, the way she reacted only to her watch, the way she spoke about the end like it was a location, not an event. At the diner, the same waitress poured my coffee without asking. She asked if I wanted a refill almost immediately, then stopped herself, confused. "I already asked you that," she said, frowning. I told her she hadn't. She shook her head. "Feels like I did." We stood there for a second, both unsettled. Then she laughed it off and walked away. I didn't. At the park, I sat on the bench and watched the water. A man jogged past twice in the same direction, same pace, same music, leaking from his headphones. It could have been coincidence. It could have been my nerves. But my chest tightened in recognition. I'd seen that loop before, not clearly, just enough to know it wasn't new. That night, I drove to the hospital named on the ID card. It wasn't abandoned. It wasn't dramatic. Just a brick building with fluorescent lights and a parking garage that smelled like oil and rain. I didn't go inside at first. I sat in the car and watched the doors. People came out with flowers, others with tired faces and empty hands. Time behaved itself there. That should have comforted me. It didn't. When I finally went in, I didn't ask about her. I asked about the wing printed on the card. The woman at the desk checked her screen, then looked back at me with a careful expression. She said the wing had been closed for years, said it dealt with rare neurological timing disorders, said most cases didn't present cleanly enough to name. "We used to say some patients were out of sync," she added, lowering her voice like the phrase itself might wander. I asked if people recovered. She paused, said recovery depended on what you meant by recovered. That was when the red herring finally collapsed under its own weight. The agreement hadn't been with a program or a coordinator or a line you could call. It had been with her own body, with a condition that didn't care how badly she wanted to stay, with a reality that occasionally let her step fully into the flow of time, and then pushed her back out again. Marla wasn't a supervisor. She'd been a nurse. The check-in calls weren't about compliance. They were about orientation, making sure she knew where and when she was. Driving home, everything she'd said rearranged itself. If I stay longer, I ruin it. Not because she'd hurt me, because she'd break down. I don't leave traces. Because traces get messy when you can't guarantee continuity. Don't try to gain time. Because forcing it only made the slippage worse. She hadn't been cold. She'd been careful. She hadn't been distant. She'd been present in the only way she could manage. And that day, our day, had been something she'd saved up, conserved, protected. A clean stretch where she could walk, talk, laugh, and feel without the ground shifting under her feet. The hardest part wasn't the grief. It was the respect. Respect for the discipline it took to give someone a memory instead of a slow tragedy. Respect for the courage it took to let me believe a simpler story until I was strong enough to hold the real one. I went home and sat at the kitchen table again. The envelope empty now, the card and letter beside it. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to chase her, to find a way to fix it. I felt something steadier, an understanding that love doesn't always look like staying. Sometimes it looks like choosing the right moment to arrive, and then choosing to leave before the damage begins. I don't look for her anymore. Not in crowds, not in reflections, not in the half-second stutters I still notice sometimes, when the world feels slightly off. I learned that some doors aren't meant to be watched. They open when they open, and if you stand there waiting, you miss the rest of the room. What she left me wasn't a mystery to solve. It was a way to stand differently inside my own time. A few weeks after that night, I went back to the diner one last time. Same counter, same black coffee. The bell over the door rang, and for just a heartbeat, my body reacted before my mind did. Then it passed. The waitress asked if I was waiting for someone. I told her no, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a lie. I started doing something she did without thinking, staying with what was actually in front of me. I stopped checking my phone during conversations. I let silences finish their sentences. I noticed how often I'd been postponing my life under the excuse of being practical. I hadn't been afraid of wasting time. I'd been afraid of inhabiting it. The watch never came back. I don't know where it went when she did, but every now and then I'll be driving or standing in line somewhere and I'll feel that same uneven tick inside my chest. Not panic, awareness. A reminder that time isn't just something you measure. It's something you participate in. I did keep the letter. It lives in the back of a drawer, folded the way she folded it. The paper soft now from being handled. I don't read it often. I don't need to. I remember the shape of her handwriting, the space she left between lines, like she knew breathing room mattered. Once a year, on the date I think was ours, I don't know for sure, but the body remembers, I take a day off. No plans, no productivity. I walk, I sit, I listen. I give the day my full attention, the way she taught me without ever saying it outright. It's not a ritual for her, it's a promise to myself. People talk about closure like it's a door you shut. This wasn't that. It was more like learning to live with a window open. Sometimes there's a draft, sometimes there's light. You don't control which. You just stop pretending you're unaffected. I never did find out where she goes when she isn't here. I don't need to. What matters is that for one day, she stepped fully into my life and showed me what presence looks like when it's chosen carefully. Some people leave behind photos, or voicemails, or long explanations meant to be revisited and decoded. She left me a standard I have to meet, a way of paying attention, a way of not postponing the parts of life that are actually alive. That's the quiet miracle of it. She didn't give me forever. She gave me one day that keeps teaching me how to live inside all the others. And on the rare nights when the world feels slightly out of sync, when the clock on the stove is a minute off and I catch it before I fix it, I leave it that way for a while. Just to remember that time isn't something you conquer. It's something you're invited into. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone steps in with you, just long enough to show you how.